Jordan Reed here. I decided to review an "Am I the Asshole" Reddit review. I always feel like every time I listen to these on YouTube that I just have so much I want to say, and there's just so much that goes through my mind. I decided to just do one, and just to see how it feels afterwards. So we got this one right here. It says, "Am I the asshole for telling my wife she can't leave her dream job because I refuse to be burdened with all her student debt?" All right. So first looking at this, um, yeah, it can go either way for me. So let's see what happens next. So it says here, my wife and I married young at 23, and now at 27 she's about to graduate from law school. The issue is she has a ton of student debt, around 195 undergrad and now law school. But over the past year she's completely changed her mind about law and becoming a lawyer. Now she wants to teach and do Teach for America after graduating. Never heard of that before. She told me this past week, we've talked about this at length, and she wants to do this because it's her new dream job. Previously it was law. Our general life advice is life isn't actually about following your passions. I mean, honestly, we should be passionate about things and we should follow our passions. But to a large degree, life isn't about doing what makes you happy. Life is about basically muddling along in some sense. Life is much more terrible and mundane than that. But anyway, anyone who really tries to fight against the system and really tries to work hard, you're gonna find that you'll find along the way that you're going you're achieving your passions and your dreams, to, at least to some extent, while you're doing a whole bunch of mundane. In fact, there's a wise person I once listened to that's saying that they compared life to like a train ride. I don't know exactly where this train ride was. Maybe it's like in England. I think it's because they live sometime. They're actually from the Western United States, but they live sometime in England. So I think they're talking about England train rides. I'm not very familiar with any trains in the United States really, other than ones that carry cargo rather than people. Point is that they said that people feel like that trains may be an exhilarating thing, and they are, but for the most part, when you're on a train ride, most of the sights that you're going to see out the window are just going to be boring. There's occasionally beautiful vistas and sunrises and sunsets and just wonderful scenes to behold, but over 90% that they didn't actually say, I'm not quoting them directly, but paraphrasing and explaining, over 90% of the time, the scenes that you're going to see are boring as junk, all right? So it's just going to be mundane, it's just going to be a train ride, but there's those small moments of exhilaration that will come from a train ride, and those kind of define the moments. I think in this culture now where we can take a picture of whatever we want and just focus on that one thing, and put it on Instagram or YouTube or whatever, it makes people feel like that life has to be much more exciting than it is. The reality is life is going to be much more drab, at least to 90%, even if you're doing it right, than anything else. But again, through working hard and through working smart, maybe you can even change those numbers. Maybe even everything in life will be glamorous. I don't know. I'm not trying to dissuade anyone, but the point is that life is much more about doing what makes sense and being happy and learning to be happy from doing what makes sense rather than actually just doing what it is. In fact, to go on further in that, just following your emotions. See what I'm talking about here? There's a lot of things I like to talk about. When people prioritize their emotions and their feelings first, that's the irony is they'll be unhappy in the long run. That's the irony about choosing to take care of your emotions, is that they don't take care of you. Your emotions, to a large extent, not to an entire extent, of course, but to a large extent, your emotions don't take care of you. If you seek your emotions first and your emotional well-being first, you're just going to end up being unhappy, which is the ironic truth about it. Is the whole purpose of taking care of your emotions is that you're doing what makes you happy, but in the long run, you're just going to be miserable. Your emotions have no capacity to be smart or to be a player. They have no ability to do that necessarily. So it's only by doing what's rational, most importantly, and treating yourself along the way, in very moderate and modest amounts, will you be happy both in the short term and the long term. But again, you're just going to be a lot of sacrifice. A lot of things will be mundane along the way. So just stopping here, life isn't about following your passions. Life is about just being a lot more disciplined than that, and then learning to be happy from that. Again, because there's no other option. If you just focus on what makes you happy all the time, you're just going to be miserable all the time, and you're not going to understand why. And it's simply because you're focused on doing what makes you happy rather than doing what actually protects you, what actually can make you generally happy or generally okay. So the husband continues to saying, I'm upset because if she teaches, her starting salary would be barely clear 35K in the first few years. And we live in a really, really expensive city. She has no intention of going back into law later, as well as she says law school was a mistake. Last night we were talking about the future, and she mentioned, I'm not going to stop here. You're heading into divorce territory already. But let's just keep going, see what happens. She mentioned our plans to have kids in a few years, and how she'd like to be a stay-at-home mom in a few years as well. I looked at her. All right, this is already telling you that she's not even thinking about anything. I mean, this is just... What? All right, but he's going to explain it for me. I don't have to say anything. I looked at her and asked how she thinks we're going to afford that when we got nearly 200K in debt on my one income. She got mad and said I'm trying to use her debt to postpone major life events like having kids. No. What? See, this is where I don't understand where she's coming from here, because that's a real thing. I know a lot of people say that the love of money is the root of all evil, and I'm not going to disagree. Probably is. But the thing is money is real. Money is just as real as anything else. Okay, let me just talk about some of my female friends for a moment here. A lot of them will tell you that sex is important in a marriage. A lot of people will try to tell you that it's about what's on the inside and the connection that matters, and that sex is just a thing that you should... No. A lot of my female friends will tell you, no, sex is important. You need to both be satisfying each other and having sex within, whatever's for you as a couple frequently enough, and that you need to not be selfish and satisfy each other and explore blah, 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 blah. They'll say a lot of things and they're right. And money is another thing. Money's real. All right, this is one reason that a lot of marriages perhaps fail, is because of just money issues. I know I'm not basing what I just said off of this, but even in my own personal experience, my own biological parents divorced, partially because of my biological father doing this exact same thing to my biological mother. He went to school to become an accountant and then backtracked on that, saying, you know what, I'm not going to school after all. And then my biological mom already made plans and life set up for him going to be a worker. So she wanted to go to school too. I forget all the dynamics at this point. But she basically set up her life according to his plan so they could be in harmony together. And then he messed all that up by deciding, you know what, I'm not going to work 2 jobs and all this other stuff I promised to do as a husband. And then, of course, he backtracked saying, you know what, I want to go back to college. It's like, what? When you're a spouse, you got to make certain compromises for the other. So, in other words, this person should not be afraid to pay for their wife's debt. That's part of the thing. But money's real. Money can cause a divorce. Money and life choices that are resulting around that money are things you can't avoid. If your wife is 200K in debt and she decides, I just want to be a teacher instead and still have kids in 5 years, that's not going to happen. He's not postponing these major life events. You are. All right? That's just how it works. And, there's just things you can't do. I mean, you can't just demand that your husband, for example, or your wife, it doesn't matter gender, it's not a gender thing. You can't just demand that your spouse just buy you a yacht in 5 years. You can't just say, okay, in 5 years, you have to be financially stable enough to do everything we've already planned, plus buy me a yacht. If this person's actually rich or something, sure. But if this person's just a normal average Joe, what? You can't just expect things from people. Anyway. We ended up fighting, and I told her she can't just teach if she expects me to be saddled with her debt as a result. I said she should at least work a high-paying job for a few years to repay a good portion. I mean, exactly. At least be if you're going to be in a dumb situation like this, definitely be willing to compromise and definitely be willing to work with your spouse. It's not worth ruining necessarily a good marriage if you can at least make some compromise in between, but compromise is always a two-way street. She said I'm prioritizing money over her happiness. Look, I already mentioned it before. Being happy leads to misery generally in the long run, unless if you're being smart about being happy. That's just the way there is to it. You can't be happy by focusing on your emotions. almost always, at least in the long run. In the short run, sure, whatever. Money over her, and that's another thing I think is just so manipulative and wrong, even though this person probably isn't really trying to manipulate her husband. I mean, it's just, you can't just say that to people. Manipulating, at least not in a situation like this. She said, I'm prioritizing money over her happiness. It's like, look, you made choices, and now you got to face up to the consequences of those choices. At least compromise and do some years of legal work just to get a chunk out the way. You're making your own life impossible. I mean, if you think about it from a strategic point of view, what are you going to do? Divorce this person? That debt's still, I mean, I don't know, I guess how divorces work in terms of debt, so maybe I'm wrong here, but that debt is still yours because you decided to go to college. So in the end of the day, you're going to have to pay that debt one way or another, because if your husband refuses to pay that debt, that's you to pay that debt. Again, I'm not sure, maybe divorce works where even debts are split in two, but I really hope that isn't the case. But this is your choice to go into debt, and your husband has made arrangements around this decision about you going to law school. Again, I'm not saying that because you're married and whatever, that you have to do things for your spouse. I'm not trying to tread in that territory, but I am saying that you have to understand that you put yourself in the situation where you're $200K in debt, and you can't force people to pay that for you. You can't force people to do whatever the hell you want them to because you decide to do that and then change your mind. Now look, that just makes you a horrible manipulative person if you really, really expect that. I understand that maybe your dreams have changed, and I'm not faulting you for that, but there's life. Life is real. Life is not some game. It's a game in the sense you make decisions, but still. So she's disappointed in my lack of support when they would be my kids in my life as well. Am I the asshole to tell her that she chooses to go down this path and may need to rethink our marriage? I haven't said anything like this yet, but I'm thinking it. Of course you should be. Based on her timeline, she'd only be at work for 3 to 4 years before becoming a homemaker. I'd have like $200K worth of debt to work through completely on my own, and I don't know if I can do it, if it'll completely ruin the rest of my life. Am I an asshole to say this? I mean, this can actually ruin your life. I mean, if you're deciding to take on this debt as an obligation, and she just decides one day that she doesn't want to be married to you anymore, again, I don't know exactly what would happen necessarily, but, I mean, basically, this is a situation in which she's really just throwing you under the bus. She's just throwing you under not just any bus, but she's throwing you under, like, the fattest bus in the entire world. Like, she's throwing you under a train, really. She can screw you over some ways to Sunday, especially if she wanted to divorce you. Because look at this, you're starting to pay this debt for her. Let's just say nothing else happens, but let's just say you're 10 years into paying off her college debt, and she decides, she wants to divorce you, which is her right. I'm not saying she shouldn't have a right to divorce you, but let's just say you don't do anything to deserve it necessarily. She just divorces you because she just ain't feeling the marriage no more, and she has kids. You know how screwed you are? Not only have you been paying thousands, tens of thousands into her debt, perhaps even over $100,000 into her debt, with your own job, with your own money by yourself, trying to take care of kids, but at the same time, it's all for nothing. I mean, this is a situation to which you got to really do some soul searching on who you really are and what you really believe marriage is about. This is one of those situations where you got to understand, is my personal security and the security of my potential future family more important than my wife? Because that's really what it's coming down to, is whose security is more important and what do you think love is? That's not a question I'm trying to answer for anyone. But let's just one of the things about life I need to just mention again is that you can't save someone else's life if it entails losing your own most of the time. If we talk about real, like in life saving, if you're trying to save someone else's life, most of the time you're told just to, unless if you're trained to do it, don't do it. Especially in like water related incidents, they're going to drown you because they're in a state of panic. They're not in the right state. So unless you're specifically trained to deal with someone trying to drown you and yet save them anyway, don't do it, because then that's 2 dead bodies over 1. The point is that you're not Superman. You don't have unlimited resources and wealth, and you can't just handle things. So there are things that are beyond your capability to handle and to do, and it's not your obligation to do them alone. Maybe do them as a couple, but when you're being thrown under the train, not just a bus in this situation, you can't do anything about it. Basically, her decisions are ending your marriage, especially since she's not willing to compromise. If she's willing to compromise, that's perhaps a different thing. But the fact alone that she's putting you in such a responsibility that you actually can't handle, that you actually can't really be responsible of, is only completely selfish and manipulative, but it's divorce worthy. And now that you don't have kids, it's really the time to be thinking about that. Are you willing to be completely screwed 10 years down the road if she decides, 5 years or 10 years or 20 years down the road, if she decides to leave you just because she feels like it, which is her right to do so? Are you really like are you really down for that? I'm not saying you should divorce her. I'm not saying you should stay with her. But this is the kind of things that you should be thinking. So are you the asshole for thinking of it? No. Not at all. This is important.